Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we'll be talking about something unique to the human experience as compared to the rest of the animal kingdom, the practice of writing. Now, throughout history, various societies have used writing for different purposes, and there's a lot of readings and videos that talk about this aspect of the study of writing, but our focus in this video will be on the study of writing systems. By way of an overview, I'll first talk a bit about what writing is, then we'll talk a bit about when writing developed, and finally we'll talk about different writing systems. So, let's get started. When talking about writing, first it's important to keep a few things in mind. Remember that writing is a recent invention compared to spoken language. After all, writing, broadly construed in the form of cave paintings and other pictograms, has only been around for some 20,000 to 30,000 years, and writing, more narrowly defined, has only been around for about 5,000 years. This can be compared to spoken language in the hominids, which has been around for hundreds of thousands of years, or depending on how you define language, millions of years in hominids. Second, remember that as linguists who study spoken and written language and linguistic practices, writing is not a purer form of language than speech. Third, whereas children acquire language naturally, given sufficient exposure, of course, writing must be explicitly learned. Fourth, of the 5,000 to 7,000 languages in the world, most are unwritten, and that may come as a surprise to you. So, writing may be viewed as useful, but it certainly isn't a requirement to be a capable language user. Well, what is writing anyway? It's useful maybe to define writing in terms of the functions it can take on. Writing can be used as a means of communication, as through letters or text messages, and as such, the written text must be self-sufficient in terms of its meaning. After all, the speaker is not there. It can be used as an aid for memory, as in note-taking. It can be used for administrative and record-keeping purposes. In fact, this may be one of the oldest, if not the oldest, function of writing. It can be used as a means of enhancing authority, whether in terms of social laws or legitimizing a language. Think about what a dictionary does. Writing also serves an aesthetic function, both in terms of form and content. Think about poetry, or the genre of a novel, a domain which is entirely dependent upon writing. However, writing can also be viewed aesthetically in terms of the actual shape of the written symbols. For example, consider calligraphy, graph art, and the proliferation of typefaces or fonts. But where did it all start? When did writing first appear? Well, writing, broadly defined, emerged some 20,000 to 30,000 years ago in the form of cave paintings, the oldest of which can be found in caves throughout Europe. While it's impossible to know for certain why these paintings were created, it's likely that they were created as a means of artistic expression, possibly combined with some ritualistic practices. These cave paintings can be defined as pictograms, or pictographs as they are also known. Pictograms used picture-based symbols to iconically represent reference. Now, remember that iconically, or in terms of iconicity, means that the form of the symbol bears some resemblance to the thing it represents in the real world. So it's much easier to iconically represent a concrete object, and because these pictograms represent concrete objects, they are quite often cross-culturally recognizable. So, regardless of where you're from, you probably recognize these images as representing a bicycle for a bike lane, a telephone, and a picture of a cigarette, in this case is banning smoking. Now, compare these pictograms to ideograms, which also use picture-based symbols but represent abstract ideas instead of concrete objects. Because of this, ideograms are less iconic and less cross-culturally recognizable. Many people will recognize the recycling symbol shown here, but if you first saw this image for the first time, would you be able to guess what it refers to? It might be very difficult. Similarly, depending on your background, you may not know that a capital P in the Western world, where English is spoken anyway, refers to a parking structure, or where parking is available, or that the symbol on the right means biohazardous material. Of course, it's best to think of pictograms and ideograms as poles on opposite ends of a picture-writing continuum. Sometimes it's hard to determine whether a symbol is a pictogram or an ideogram. Sometimes it shows elements of both. Now, pictograms and ideograms are useful, but they're limited in their ability to convey certain meanings. In fact, these picture-based systems don't actually represent human language, just objects and concepts. As a result, even though these systems require the same elements as writing, that is, something to write with and something to write on, they don't technically count as writing. Well then, when did actual writing first emerge? The first known writing system for which we have evidence is cuneiform, also known as wedge-form script. Cuneiform was created some 5,000 years ago by the Sumerians and was later adopted by the Babylonians and Assyrians. It was used widely by the 2nd millennium BC and continued to be used by many in the ancient Near East before eventually disappearing around 100 AD due to the increased use of Aramaic, Greek, and Latin. We know a lot about cuneiform because it was typically written on clay tablets, the ideal surface for preserving writing. Cuneiform is a mixture of a couple different writing systems, the first of which is called morphographic. The first thing to remember is that with morphographic writing, the relationship between the symbol and its referent is arbitrary, though there may be a few exceptions. Morphographic writing systems essentially take the morpheme as its unit of analysis. Now, you may have heard of the term logographic writing, which takes the word as its unit of analysis, but I think it's more accurate to treat a lot of so-called logographic writing systems as morphographic. After all, one morpheme could be a word by itself. With morphographic writing systems, basically, each morpheme gets its own symbol. So this means that thousands and thousands of symbols are required to make this system work in order to account for all of the morphemes in a language. Some examples of this kind of writing include Chinese, the symbol for mother as shown on the left. In the middle we have the symbol for sun in cuneiform and the symbol for soul in Egyptian hieroglyphics. Even the symbols for the number 4 and the dollar sign can be considered morphographic. Next, we have a syllabic writing system. Syllabic writing systems, or syllabaries, take the syllable, some combination of consonant and vowel, as its unit of analysis. These symbols are, again, arbitrary, and in order to account for all of the syllables in a language, syllabaries may require hundreds of symbols to make that system work. One notable example is the Cherokee syllabary, developed in the early 1800s by a Cherokee man named Sequoyah, who reportedly encountered a copy of the Bible. Now, even though Sequoyah couldn't speak or read English, he intuitively understood that the written symbols on the page represented language. And so, without knowing that written English employs an alphabetic system, he took each letter to represent a syllable in Cherokee. So, for example, he assigned the letter K to the syllable tso, and the capital H to the syllable mi. Cherokee enjoyed high literacy rates well into the 20th century. Another example of a syllabary is the hiragana and the katakana systems used for Japanese. Next, we have an alphabetic system. For many of you, this may be the most familiar of the writing systems we discuss. Alphabets represent both consonant and vowel sounds. Because this writing system takes individual sounds, at the phonemic level, as the basic unit of analysis, only around 50 or fewer symbols may be needed to make that system work. Languages that use alphabets include English, Greek, and Russian. Next, we have an abjad system. Abjads are like alphabets in that they represent consonant sounds, but abjads do not represent vowel sounds. This means even fewer symbols may be required to make the system work. Now, you may be thinking that such a system would make the reader's task more difficult if there's no vowels represented, but consider the following sentence, written using something akin to an abjad system. Now, even though no vowels are written here, you probably have little trouble reading this as, this sentence is written without any vowels. Languages that use abjads include Phoenician and Ancient Hebrew. Next, we have an abugida system. Abugidas represent consonant sounds, but only represent vowel sounds by either manipulating the shape of the consonant symbol or by adding diacritics to the consonant symbols themselves. So diacritics are things like an umlaut or a tilde, little things that go on top, under, or on either side of an actual grapheme or written symbol. Examples of abugidas include the Devanagari script and Cree syllabics. So note that even though it's called syllabics, it's technically an abugida system because the vowel quality is actually specified by changing the orientation of the consonant symbol. Pretty cool, huh? Okay, so we've talked about a few different writing systems, and they differ depending on the unit of analysis used by each. Morphographic writing systems rely on representing morphemes, which, again, can sometimes be words by themselves. Syllabaries rely on representing syllables. Alphabets rely on representing consonant and vowel sounds. Abjads only represent consonants, and abugidas represent consonants and vowels, but they represent vowels by tweaking the shape of the consonant symbol or by adding a diacritic to that symbol. Well, that's it for now. I hope you found this video useful. Thanks so much for watching.